The battle for personal AI, the great migration from data centers to devices. Section 1, Prologue. When intelligence lived in the cloud. There was a moment, brief in hindsight, but absolute in its confidence, when we believed intelligence would live forever in the cloud. The world had just awakened to the strange new power of machine learning. Models were growing exponentially, datasets swelling beyond imagination, and every breakthrough demanded more. More compute, more memory, more parallelism, more metal stacked in silent, refrigerated halls. The data center became the cathedral of this new faith, humming with the electric liturgy of GPUs pushing math to its limits. NVIDIA stood at the center of it all, a quiet superpower. Its chips, once the hidden engines of gaming consoles, transformed into the beating hearts of modern AI. A single GPU rack could train a model that would go on to reshape industries. A warehouse full of them could move markets, accelerate scientific discovery, or fuel the ambitions of nations. Scale wins, we told ourselves, and scale meant more cloud, more GPUs, more distance between the compute and the human. Hyperscalers built empires on this logic. They carved out deserts to erect vast compute fortresses and laid fiber like the arteries of a new digital organism. Intelligence was something you accessed from afar, through an API call, a web interface, a distant cluster of machines that never slept. We accepted this arrangement without question, as if it were the natural order of things. AI would always be centralized, always remote, always owned by someone else. What lived in the cloud was too big, too hungry, too powerful to ever fit in the palm of your hand. But beneath this era of cloud supremacy, a quiet tension was already forming. A subtle friction between what intelligence could be and where it was forced to live. Because while the cloud could train intelligence, it could never fully personalize it. It could never truly understand the unfiltered details of your daily life, your habits, your preferences, your rhythms. The private but unspoken data that never leaves the rooms you inhabit. The cloud could refine intelligence, but it could not accompany you. And so, without fanfare, a new question began to emerge at the margins of the field, whispered by engineers, economists, and architects of the future. What happens when intelligence does not need the cloud anymore? This is the moment the migration began. The moment when the gravitational center of AI started to shift, away from distant data centers, away from hyperscaler dominance, and toward the edge of human life. Into pockets, into homes, into vehicles, into wearables, into everything. The era of cloud-bound intelligence was only the opening chapter. The real story, the one with consequences for nations, companies, and every individual, starts when intelligence breaks free and comes home. The Great Migration had begun. Section 2. The cloud that built the revolution. If the prologue was the stillness before the shift, this chapter is the machinery that made the shift possible. Long before AI became the North Star of global competition, its foundations were laid in the most unlikely place, the gaming industry. GPUs, graphics processors, were never meant to reason, predict, or imagine. They were built to shade pixels, render worlds, and make virtual light behave convincingly on a screen. A niche tool for entertainment. But in 2012, everything changed. The birth of modern AI, from AlexNet to large language models. AlexNet, a neural network that suddenly outperformed every competitor, did so using an NVIDIA GPU the researchers had effectively hacked for parallel math. The results were shocking. For the first time, a machine saw the world with uncanny acuity. This spark spread. Neural networks grew faster than any branch of computation in history. Convolutional neural networks, then recurrent neural networks, then transformers, then multimodal large language models. Each leap demanded more compute than the last, making NVIDIA's architecture the de facto engine of AI's Big Bang. A decade later, generative models spoke, wrote, reasoned, and hallucinated like creative savants. And behind every breakthrough was a warehouse of GPUs running at full tilt. How GPUs became the engines of intelligence. The secret was parallelism. GPUs were designed to perform thousands of small operations simultaneously, perfect for the matrix multiplications at the heart of neural networks. Cloud providers realized that training intelligence was simply a matter of stacking enough GPUs together, like tiling mirrors to catch more light. NVIDIA leaned in, transforming a gaming chip into a sovereign computational platform. Custom interconnects, a full-stack software ecosystem, rack-scale systems, vertical integration across hardware and software. To build AI, you needed GPUs. To use GPUs effectively, you needed NVIDIA. This was not a chip company. It was an empire. C. The dominance of hyperscaler infrastructure. AWS, Google, Microsoft, Meta, and the Chinese giants raced to expand their data centers. What started as server farms grew into compute cities. Substations were built solely to power them. Water was redirected to cool them. Governments adjusted infrastructure forecasts around them. These were not cloud services. They were industrial AI refineries. Training a frontier model became a geopolitical event. Even inference, once trivial, grew into a global sink for power and capital. D. Why the world accepted centralized AI as inevitable. Cloud AI wasn't just a technological choice, it was a psychological one. We believed models would keep growing forever. We believed only hyperscalers had the capital to train them. We believed AI would always be too big for personal devices. We believed privacy must be traded for intelligence. Centralization became the mythology of the field, the idea that real intelligence lives far away behind locked doors. But the mythology had cracks. Beneath the surface, costs were rising, demand was exploding, and every new model strained the cloud-first assumption closer to its breaking point. And soon, those fractures would widen into a chasm. Section 3. Cracks in the monoculture. For a time, the cloud-first world held steady, its dominance unquestioned, its future seemingly secure. But no empire, not even a computational one, is immune to the pressures of scale. And as AI ambitions grew, the foundations of the GPU monoculture began to tremble. The first tremors were subtle, longer wait times for GPU access, then ballooning cloud bills, then global shortages that felt eerily similar to oil shocks. But these were not just logistical hiccups. They were signals, early warnings that the centralized model of AI was straining under its own weight. A. GPU shortages, bottlenecks, and cost explosions. Demand outpaced supply at every turn. Every startup needed GPUs. Every enterprise wanted GPUs. Every nation sought GPUs as if they were strategic minerals. Hyperscalers hoarded them. Prices soared. Waitlists grew. Innovation slowed, not for lack of ideas, but for lack of silicon. This was not a chip shortage. It was a visibility problem. One supplier had become the critical path for global intelligence. B. The rise of inference versus training. Training was no longer the main story. Once models achieved competence, the real cost was not making them. It was using them. Inference became the economic gravity well. Every query, every decision, every conversation, every agentic action, each required compute again and again and again. Inference does not end. In the old world, you trained once and served many. In the modern world, you pay forever. Businesses began to whisper the unthinkable. We cannot keep running this in the cloud. C. The new economics of AI at scale. The cloud-first model began to buckle. GPUs were too expensive for continuous inference. Data centers were too power-hungry. Latency was too high for real-time interactions. Privacy was too fragile for sensitive tasks. Bottlenecks were too severe for global deployment. Running every AI interaction through remote servers became the computational equivalent of boiling water with a fusion reactor. Technically possible, economically absurd. D. Emerging pressure for cheaper, smaller local compute. The field needed a new answer. A revelation emerged. If we can run intelligence locally, we bypass all the constraints of the cloud. No bandwidth requirements, no privacy compromises, no variable costs, no dependency on hyperscalers, no reliance on GPU megastructures, no single point of geopolitical failure. A new logic appeared. The farther intelligence is from the user, the more expensive it becomes. The closer it is to the user, the more powerful it feels. The world that built AI would not be the world that most benefited from it. The center was losing its grip. The edge was beginning to pull. Section 4. The hardware war begins. Every technological shift begins with a quiet moment, a moment when the old model still dominates, but the new model becomes too compelling to ignore. This was that moment for AI hardware. The cracks in the cloud-first paradigm did not just whisper of change, they invited a counter-revolution. The constraints of GPUs, the rising costs of inference, and the accelerating need for autonomy triggered the largest, fastest, and most consequential hardware arms race since the invention of the microprocessor. This was the beginning of the hardware war, a conflict fought not with armies, but with silicon. A. Hyperscalers, building custom ASICs. The hyperscalers were the first to make a move. AWS built Trainium and Inferentia. Google evolved the TPU through 7 generations. Meta announced its own accelerators. Microsoft began designing Maya ASICs. OpenAI quietly inked deals to build custom silicon of its own. Tesla contributed massive inference ASICs for autonomous driving. These companies were not just optimizing hardware. They were breaking free from a single vendor dependency. Custom ASICs promised freedom, lower cost per inference, higher power efficiency, predictable supply, reduced reliance on NVIDIA, customization tailored to internal workloads. Where GPUs are Swiss Army knives, ASICs are surgical blades built not for everything, but for exactly what you need and nothing more. B. The diversification of silicon species, GPUs, ASICs, NPUs, FPGAs. What followed was an evolutionary explosion, a Cambrian bloom of specialized compute. GPU, the generalist muscle, optimized for massive parallel math. ASIC, the specialist weapon, hardened for recurring inference. NPU, the edge-native engine, built for low power and local execution. FPGA, the shapeshifter, reconfigurable for niche or experimental tasks. The monolithic GPU world fractured into an ecosystem of competing designs. This was not mere diversification. It was the birth of compute pluralism. C. Broadcom, TSMC, and the new supply chain geopolitics. Behind the hyperscalers stood the real power, the manufacturers. TSMC was the irreplaceable foundry at the center of the world's AI ambitions. Every chip, from NVIDIA's Blackwell to Google's TPU to Amazon's Trainium, passed through its fabs. Broadcom and Marvell, meanwhile, enabled hyperscalers to design silicon without assembling entire semiconductor divisions. They became the arms dealers of the Silicon Age. The geopolitical stakes could not have been higher. Chips were no longer components, they were strategic assets. D. Sovereign compute as a national strategy. What started as enterprise cost management quickly escalated into national survival. Countries realized that, without compute, you cannot train models. Without models, you cannot compete. Without silicon sovereignty, you remain strategically exposed. Nations stockpiled GPUs like oil. They poured billions into domestic fabs. They wooed TSMC and Samsung. They reshaped foreign policy around supply chain control. AI was not software. It was infrastructure. The hardware war shattered the illusion of a single stable path for AI. It created the opening for everything that followed: the rise of the edge, the birth of personal intelligence, the decentralization of power. The conflict that began in the cloud would end somewhere very different. This content is brought to you by Bobby Giggs. Promote your brand here and reach a wide audience across platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow the links in the description to get started. Section 5. The Great Migration to the Edge. Every revolution has an inflection point, a moment when the logic of the old world breaks and a new logic becomes inevitable. For AI, that moment arrived when the industry realized a simple truth: intelligence does not have to live far away. It can live with you. What once required warehouse-scale compute was shrinking. What once demanded megawatts of power was tightening into watts. What once relied on distant GPU clusters was being reborn in the silicon inside personal devices. The migration didn't begin with drama. It began with efficiency. A. On-device AI becomes technically viable. For years, the idea of running AI locally felt romantic but unrealistic, like imagining a jet engine inside a bicycle. Then the breakthroughs arrived. Quantization reduced memory requirements. Distillation shrank massive models into compact ones. Mixture of experts enabled specialization and routing. Efficient transformer variants cut compute dramatically. Local vector stores enabled personal memory on device. Tasks that once demanded a data center could suddenly run on a phone. The impossible became merely inconvenient. Then, the inconvenient became standard. B. NPUs become the new frontier: phones, laptops, wearables. This migration required a new kind of silicon, not baby GPUs, not cut-down ASICs, but NPUs, neural processing units, built from the ground up for local intelligence. Apple built neural engines into M and A series chips. Qualcomm embedded NPUs across Snapdragon. Samsung advanced Exynos NPUs. Intel and AMD brought NPUs to PCs. Google's Tensor chips turned pixels into AI-native devices. Billions of devices suddenly had edge-native intelligence baked in. C. Small models, hybrid models, personal context stores. 3 innovations set the stage for personal AI. 1. Small models capable enough to reason but light enough to run locally. 2. Hybrid execution allowing seamless on-device plus cloud intelligence. 3. Personal context stores enabling devices to build a private memory of the user. An AI that does not need to ask a server who you are because it already knows. D. Privacy, latency, autonomy. Why intelligence moves closer. Three forces drove intelligence toward the edge. Privacy, your most personal data never leaves your device. Latency, your life has no patience for cloud round trips. Autonomy, local AI does not depend on weather, infrastructure, or corporate uptime. On-device AI becomes an autonomous companion, instant, private, and uninterrupted. The migration to the edge was not optional. It was inevitable. Section 6. The rise of personal AI. If the migration to the edge prepared the ground, this chapter plants the seed. This is the rise of personal AI, not a chatbot, not an app, not an assistant, a companion. A. From assistants to companions, the new user layer. Traditional assistants were cloud-bound. They never knew you. They never remembered. They were identical for every user. But with on-device intelligence, AI becomes persistent. AI becomes contextual. AI becomes individualized. AI becomes yours. It does not just answer. It anticipates, it understands, it remembers. B. AI that persists, adapts, remembers, and travels with you. Cloud AI behaves like a hotel concierge, professional, helpful, and utterly forgetful once you leave. Personal AI behaves like a long-term companion. Breakthroughs enabling this: local memory, adaptive on-device fine-tuning, multimodal awareness processed privately. This creates something profound, an intelligence that travels with you through time, not just across devices. C. The disintermediation of cloud dependence. Once intelligence moves to the edge, cloud providers lose leverage. The value shifts from centralized compute to distributed presence, from model size to model intimacy, from mass scale to individual personalization. It also threatens the business models that grew around it. Surveillance advertising collapses when data stays device-side. Subscription-based inference becomes unnecessary. Cloud lock-in dissolves as edge models improve. Latency-sensitive applications migrate locally. The API economy loses its anchor point. The cloud doesn't disappear, but it recedes into a background role, a refinement layer, not a guardian. D. Why the future interface to AI is not an app, but a presence. Historically, intelligence lived behind screens and inputs. Personal AI dissolves the interface. It becomes your operating system, your notifications, your environment, your context, your ambient companion. This is not software. It is a sense, an always present, always adaptive intelligence at your side. Section 7. China's early glimpse of the future. China entered the future early, not through superiority, but through necessity. It optimized for proximity rather than scale, inadvertently foreshadowing the global pivot to edge AI. A. Constraints that forced on-device optimization. China's path was shaped by unreliable bandwidth, strict data governance, enormous user bases, prohibitive cloud economics, limited GPU supply due to export controls. These constraints forced efficiency, low power, low latency, local inference, minimal data movement. China did not choose the edge chose China. B. Mobile-first super apps as proto-personal AIs. Chinese users lived inside ecosystems like WeChat, Alipay, Douyin, and Meituan. These were not apps. They were operating systems that mediated daily life. They learned, they predicted, they orchestrated. They were personal AIs in everything but name. C. Local inference as political and technical necessity. Two forces accelerated China's move to on-device AI. National policy prioritizing data locality, technical optimization from companies like ByteDance. Local inference was not optional, it was strategic. D. Lessons for the rest of the world. China showed that AI does not need to be massive to be powerful. On-device intelligence is more scalable than cloud intelligence. The winning platforms anchor the user rather than the server. Efficiency is destiny. Super apps foreshadow personal AI. China saw the edge early because the cloud was never fully accessible. Now, the world is racing to catch up. Section 8. The battle lines for personal intelligence. As AI began its migration to the edge, the map of competition redrew itself. The central question was no longer who controls the biggest data centers, but who controls the intelligence closest to the user. The battle lines hardened across industries, technologies, and alliances. Companies once aligned in cloud dominance now faced off over a more intimate frontier: the personal device, the operating system, and the silicon beneath it. This is not a contest for market share. It is a contest for mind share, for the intelligence that accompanies users through every hour of their lives. A. Apple, Google, Qualcomm, Samsung, the edge silicon giants. The first battlefield is the device itself, the hardware that determines whether AI lives near you or far away. Apple, with its M-series and A-series chips, quietly built the most advanced consumer-grade NPUs on Earth. Its neural engine runs billions of operations per second with negligible power draw. Apple's privacy stance, once dismissed as branding, now becomes strategic. On-device AI is the only AI that meets its philosophy. Google uses Pixel devices and tensor chips optimized for real-time AI, speech, vision, translation, and photos. Its AI-first identity depends on marrying cloud intelligence with local execution. Android's scale, measured in billions of devices, gives Google immense leverage at the edge. Qualcomm enabled on-device AI long before it was fashionable. Power efficiency and mobile optimization make it a critical player in the device-centric future. Samsung's Exynos NPUs turn Samsung devices into autonomous AI platforms. The company's vertical integration, from memory to displays to handsets, gives it unique control over mobile AI. If the cloud was NVIDIA's arena, the edge is theirs. B. Meta versus Google, alliances and splinters in compute ecosystems. Meta choosing, or even considering, Google's TPU architecture hinted at a deeper realignment. Traditionally, Meta and Google competed in advertising. Google maintained TPU exclusivity for internal workloads. Meta relied heavily on NVIDIA for training and inference. But the economics of AI shifted the terrain. Meta cannot rely solely on NVIDIA's roadmap or pricing. Google wants TPU adoption to escape NVIDIA's gravity. Both companies need to reduce inference costs by orders of magnitude. What emerges is a rare moment of collaboration in the open-source frontier model ecosystem. A shared threat, cloud cost, and compute scarcity pushes former rivals into tactical alignment. The battle for personal intelligence dissolves old rivalries and creates new ones, alliances formed not out of ideology but necessity. C. Microsoft and OpenAI, cloud first struggling to adapt. Microsoft and OpenAI built the modern AI boom through cloud dominance. Azure became synonymous with frontier training. GPT became the global reference point for AI capability. Together, they catalyzed the largest GPU build-out in history. But as intelligence migrates to the edge, their cloud-centric model faces friction. Heavy reliance on expensive NVIDIA hardware, limited NPU presence in consumer devices, business models optimized for online usage, high friction in delivering local inference at scale. The paradox is stark. Microsoft and OpenAI lead in model performance, but risk trailing in personal presence. To win the next era, they must shrink the frontier into something small enough to accompany the user, a challenge as cultural as it is technical. D. NVIDIA's new role in an edge-dominant world. NVIDIA, once the unquestioned ruler of AI, faces a future it did not design. ASICs erode its inference advantage. NPUs threaten the relevance of cloud-first compute. On-device models reduce dependency on frontier-scale training. Foundries like TSMC, not GPU vendors, become strategic choke points. NVIDIA remains indispensable for training the largest models and will continue shipping millions of GPUs into hyperscalers. But the center of gravity is shifting. The cloud is no longer the exclusive home of intelligence. Device manufacturers set the pace of on-device AI. Model innovation increasingly aligns with edge hardware constraints. NVIDIA does not disappear. It transforms from empire to cornerstone. Still vital, still powerful, but no longer the sole gateway to intelligence. The battle lines for personal intelligence are drawn across three layers: chip makers who build the engines, platform owners who orchestrate the user experience, and model creators who supply the cognitive spark. The winners will be those who integrate all three, not to dominate the cloud, but to inhabit the lives of billions. Section 9. Winners, Losers, and the New Power Map. Every technological migration leaves a trail of reordering. Old hierarchies disrupted, new hegemonies formed, incumbents humbled, outsiders empowered. The shift from cloud-bound AI to personal, on-device intelligence is no exception. Its consequences are deeper, more structural, and more intimate than the transitions that came before. When intelligence moves from remote servers to the devices we live with, power itself migrates. From centers to edges, from empires to individuals, from platforms to pockets. Here is the new power map taking shape. A. Who controls the edge? Controls the user. For decades, control of the user experience flowed from app marketplaces, cloud logins, advertising ecosystems, recommendation engines, and platform policies. But personal AI does not sit inside an app. It is the interface. That means the operating system becomes the gateway. The hardware becomes the boundary. The on-device model becomes the mediator. The NPU becomes the platform's beating heart. This reorders influence. Apple, Google, and Samsung rise. Hyperscalers become background infrastructure. Advertisers lose visibility as data stays local. Interfaces flatten into a single, persistent AI presence. Control shifts toward those who own the daily device, not the distant data center. B. Who controls the wafer? Controls the world. As AI becomes embedded in everything, the global competition for chip manufacturing intensifies. Power consolidates around TSMC, the world's irreplaceable foundry; Samsung, second only to TSMC; Intel, revived by geopolitical necessity. If chips are the new oil, fab capacity is the new geopolitical leverage. A world that once depended on cloud providers now depends on wafer throughput, lithography precision, energy abundance, supply chain resilience. Foundries become the new superpowers of the computational age. C. Why the most important AI battle is not scale, but proximity. The cloud race was about scale. Who trains the biggest model? Who owns the most GPUs? Who controls the most data? But the personal AI race is about proximity. The intelligence that wins is the intelligence closest to the user, closest to their data, closest to their habits, closest to their identity, closest to their environment. Proximity unlocks personalization. Personalization unlocks trust. Trust unlocks dependence. Dependence unlocks dominance. The AI that lives with the user eventually shapes the user. D. The geopolitical implications of personal AI ecosystems. When AI becomes personal, nation-states face questions without precedent. Who governs AI that never touches the cloud? How do you regulate intelligence that lives on device? How do you enforce borders in a world of ambient digital agents? What happens when personal AIs coordinate or negotiate autonomously? What is the national interest of a population equipped with sovereign intelligence? In this world, nations that secure energy win data centers. Nations that secure foundries win hardware. Nations that secure device markets win personal intelligence. Nations that fail become computationally dependent. The personal AI future does not eliminate geopolitics. It intensifies it, shifting the battlefield from cloud regions to living rooms. Winners are those with the deepest personal presence. Losers are those without proximity. The future belongs to whoever controls the intelligence right next to you. Section 10. Epilogue: The intelligence in your pocket. In the early days of the AI revolution, we believed intelligence lived out there, in distant data centers, behind fiber lines and GPU racks. AI was a destination, something you accessed like electricity from a grid. But as the years unfolded, a different truth emerged. Quiet at first, then undeniable. Intelligence was never meant to be remote. It was meant to be close. Close enough to hear your voice with no delay. Close enough to understand your routines. Close enough to keep your secrets. Close enough to become an extension of your awareness. This is where the migration ends. Not in data centers, but in pockets, homes, vehicles, and wearables. The convergence of autonomy, privacy, and sovereignty. As AI settles at the edge, three principles fuse. Autonomy, intelligence that does not depend on the cloud. Privacy, intelligence that never leaks your data. Sovereignty, intelligence that you own. For the first time in digital history, the user becomes the center of computational power. Your device becomes sovereign territory. Your NPU becomes a microfactory of thought. Your personal AI becomes a companion that answers only to you. The democratization of intelligence through local compute. A personal AI is not a reduced version of cloud intelligence. It is a different kind of intelligence. Faster because it is local. Safer because it does not share your data. More adaptive because it learns continuously. More human because it is built around a single person. Democratization arrives not by scaling access, but by scaling presence. Why the next great AI leap is personal, not industrial. Industrial AI, frontier training, supercomputers, large-scale inference was the foundation. Personal AI is the culmination. It is where AI becomes lived experience, where machines become relational, where productivity, creativity, and autonomy merge in daily life. A closing reflection on intelligence coming home. When technology reaches maturity, it always becomes smaller, closer, more human. The mainframe shrank into the personal computer. The personal computer dissolved into the smartphone, and now the cloud dissolves into personal AI, an intelligence that does not wait behind a login screen, but walks with you. The great migration is complete. Intelligence has come home, and in that migration lies the quiet revolution of our time, the shift from AI as a distant spectacle to AI as an intimate companion. The battle for personal AI has already begun. But the world that emerges will not be defined by who won the cloud. It will be defined by who won you.